You might think I'm here to bash religion, and you'd be wrong. I have immense respect for what I prefer to call the mythopoetic impulse and the religious experience. The mythopoetic impulse is the engine inside of us that wants transcendence, that aches for something more. And for some, it's solved by Star Wars. For others, horrifyingly, it's solved by Andrew Tate. But neither of those are truly religious. Nonetheless, we assemble important and meaningful stories and symbols into our everyday world. It can be religious, but it doesn't have to be. In contrast, but related to the mythopoetic impulse, is the religious experience, the moments that make you feel truly connected to something numinous, or alternatively, the sheer paralyzing terror of cosmic horror. Not simply the desire for meaning, but the experience of it. We'll talk about what separates these moments from the everyday and why it has nothing to do with what you believe. Let's dive in. But first, this is still a new channel and no one looks forward to not hearing me say this more than I do, but please hit the like button and subscribe. I've got more of these coming. Beliefs, I think, are overemphasized and a little suspect. We often talk about beliefs as though they are accomplishments of some sort, though the only time I've ever heard someone say, I choose to believe something or other, is when they actually don't believe something, but they're willing to act like they do for the sake of being polite, or it's more convenient to the moment. Beliefs are not entirely voluntary. According to the big Sapolsky, they aren't voluntary at all, since free will doesn't exist, but I'm going to save that argument for another day. Believing that there is intrinsic meaning to existence is extremely powerful and goes back to well before we had organized religion at all. Freedom of religion was a founding principle for the United States, at least in theory, if not always in practice. In Thomas Jefferson's Virginia, blasphemy was a capital offense. Though many of the original colonies were founded by groups seeking religious people, they were definitely seeking it only for themselves, leading to issues like, say the Salem Witch Trials. Although there are some interesting theories out there that because of idiosyncrasies within the law, where those who were accused of witchcraft would have to surrender their property to the people who accused them. So in some ways it was more like a real estate dispute where psychopathic individuals who probably gave a certain lip service to religion to fit in, but weren't exactly feeling the whole love thy neighbor bit, decided they could make a buck getting folks riled up. Certainly when there's money to be made or power to be had, even sincerely religious people can be subject to mind-boggling amounts of cognitive dissonance. There's also a distinction to be made between freedom of religion and freedom from religion, as we tend to see over and over again. I can't even go to the laundromat without somebody trying to hand me a damn pamphlet with poorly drawn comics about how my eternal damnation is guaranteed if I don't stop doing my laundry right then and there and get saved. It's like involuntarily installing, a browser extension from visiting a website. I mean, does that ever work? I try to be polite, but it's actually a pretty rude thing to do. Posting the Ten Commandments and prayer in school is evergreen issues we seem to keep fighting over and over again. White Christian nationalism is so ascendant right now that Apple TV decided to postpone a Jessica Chastain show I'd been looking forward to called Savant a few days before it was set to premiere, perhaps in part because a misogynistic Australian YouTuber who pretends to be drunk decided to troll it, and the conservative outrage machine switched on. If you haven't heard anything about this, it's because the media sucks at covering First Amendment issues, but I think in many ways this is a bigger deal than Jimmy Kimmel. Nonetheless, the story just died. It would be a lot easier to convince women that there is no patriarchal conspiracy against them if we would just stop doing patriarchal conspiracy type things. says the white man in an ascot. But this is authoritarian pre-compliance at its finest, so well executed, nobody's even talking about it. I am not entirely unsympathetic to how religious conservatives must be feeling. Christianity has been having a hard time of it for, say, ballpark figure 500 years or so. That's when the Catholic Church got Galileo to renounce his empirical data supporting the heretical Copernican claim of heliocentrism, which they did by threatening to burn him alive. I have a bit more sympathy for Galileo's compliance than I do for Apple TV's because of that, but also because it is rumored right after the trial, Galileo was heard to whisper, "Eppur si muove." My apologies to Italian speakers for murdering that, but what it means is, and yet it moves. Despite his public renunciation, he continued to believe in heliocentrism, and more specifically, that the Earth was just another planet like the ones he had been watching in the sky with the telescope he invented. Since then, the percentage of people who agreed with him had only increased until recently. Geocentrism, flat earth theory, and creationism have all had a notable resurgence lately. And this is despite the fact that Christianity itself, and even religion more generally, are in free fall. It is predicted in the next few years as many as 100,000 churches will close across the United States. That's almost a full quarter of them, maybe more. Again, you may be surprised to learn, I do not see this as an unadulterated good. For starters, it is yet another contraction of so-called third places, situations that are neither home nor work, and yet provide us with an important place to be and live our lives. Hell, I still miss arcades. At their best, churches would take people from across the local socioeconomic spectrum and build important relationships between them. Such churches were often also driven by their faith to offer charity locally, regardless of whether you attended that church or not. The official social safety net in the United States is the most pathetic in the Western world, and we've got the crime rate to prove it. Trump and his allies, in their bid to go full North Korea, have decided to destroy even that. And so far, they're doing a bang-up job of it. You got to hand it to them. Having both of these support distribution systems collapse at the same time is not going to be a good thing. What truly scares me about all this, more than anything, is where America's dwindling Christians are choosing to worship instead. Massive megachurches are less about encountering spirit, building community, offering charity, contemplating divinity, than they are essentially brainwashing centers for profit. That's the business model, and business is good. The only place the wealth that comes into those operations is redistributed is into the head pastor's pockets. More and more, these places are becoming overtly political as well, whereas in the past, in smaller community churches, people who voted differently might engage in small talk over fried chicken at the church picnic. There is now instead a laser-like focus on making sure the thousands of people in attendance know that God is also watching Fox News, and while your vote may be anonymous to the public, it is not anonymous to him. And to vote for anyone other than the anointed one is a vote for Satan, putting your very soul at risk. There is even a distinct sect within MAGA who believe Donald Trump has been anointed by God, which means there is literally nothing he can do, nothing that would be sinful or much less a bad idea. If you don't believe me, read the Old Testament. Well, the good news, pun intended, with the megachurch movement is that such operations can be vulnerable to scandal, and the first two of the 7 deadly sins, pride and greed, has been known to lead to their ruination. More importantly, megachurches have very high levels of churn. You can't have a real church picnic for 10,000 people. So congregants often do not form the sort of social bonds more traditional churches foster. If Jesus had played Woodstock once, it would be the event of a generation. When you have to do it every week, it gets a little old after a while. Not to mention expensive. For many people, it works for a time, and then it doesn't, leaving them feeling disaffected and perhaps even anxious about their relationship to faith in general. At which point, I and the other members of the organized Antifa left get a cash bounty from our dear leader, George Soros, to bring them into the tight-knit community of people who answer survey questions about their religion as spiritual but unaffiliated. I'm just kidding. That's not how any of this works. What this does tell me, though, is that the megachurch movement, while unlikely to ever disappear completely because the business model is just that good, may be more of a passing fad than a sign of things to come. Long term, anyway. Boomers have always been subject to a bit of groupthink, but starting with Gen X, the rest of us have always felt left out of the group. The reason we feel that way is because it is true. That is actually happening. And that is why we feel that way. For the moment, though, it is a real problem for America and, by extension, the rest of the world. I am a bit of a Cold War kid and prone to think we are the indispensable nation, mainly because we've been so blessed by geography. It's impossible to say whether that's God's doing or not, but great power requires great responsibility, regardless of where it comes from. And the issue is not entirely relevant. What is relevant is that ultra-religious conservatives feel they are under attack and are naturally assuming an aggressively defensive position. Not recognizing that is just kind of bad sportsmanship on some level. But if I was going to be mean about it, secular intelligentsia have been kicking their ass since Galileo, and it's hard not to gloat a little. All that is also actually happening. They feel threatened because they are threatened. Freedom of religion does not mean that you are free from the effects of the scientific method, and you can't cherry pick which parts of it you like. You see what I did there? There's also a few other norms we've developed, like not stoning witches to death or burning heretics alive. This has been going on for the last 500 years or so, depending on where you measure from, which is important. It also seems unlikely to end anytime soon. It is a fatiguing fight to have, and impossible not to resent people who take pleasure in the idea of you spending eternity in a lake of fire. But going by the quantifiable data we have so far, I'm liking our chances. Thanks for watching. Take care.